I'm Bree Luck, and you are listening to the Pause to Go podcast, where we explore the process of turning life's transitions into stellar transformations. You can expect interviews with experts, straight talk with remarkable humans, and conversations about making the most of every phase of life. Because when we approach life's stickiest spots with curiosity, support, and a little bit of inspiration, anything is possible. So whether you're on your way to work or settling in with your favorite beverage, together we can pause to go. As a solopreneur, I really like the flexibility to work from pretty much anywhere, so I'm happy to head down to Code-Based Co-working, where I can enjoy the company of others while I tackle my to-do list. Also, they have a state-of-the-art, consumer-friendly podcasting studio that is, frankly, my home away from home. So head over to Code-Based Co-working, check it out, and when you do, tell them that Bree sent you. When I started Pause to Go, my real intention was to give people the tools we need to make it through times of transition. And one of the things that a lot of people turn to in times of transition is a little bit of woo. In my structure of the 7 paths to creating change, I would say this is somewhere between spirituality and intuition. In 2019, my friend Leighton said, Bree, you need to listen to this woman, Jessica Lanyadoo. She's an astrologer. And I said, I'm not really that into astrology. And she said, you will be into Jessica Lanyadoo. She was right. And I have listened to every episode since 2019. She's been in my ear a lot. She marries a real desire to just help us not be assholes to each other with astrology. Jessica Lanyadoo is a humanistic astrologer, psychic medium, tarot reader, and animal communicator. And I gotta say that lately she's been doing some animal communications, and they're just a lot of fun to listen to. She's the host of the top-ranking astrology and advice show, Ghost of a Podcast, the co-founder of the Get Out the Vote project, Zodiac the Vote, and she was the co-host of TLC's digital show, Stargazing. I really loved this conversation, and I'll be honest, it gets a little dark. It gets a little heavy, but that's Jessica, and those are our times. So I encourage you to sit with it. We can make space for the darker times and find some light in them too. So here is Jessica Lanyadoo, host of Ghost of a Podcast. I started listening in 2019. My friend Leighton said, Bree, you need to listen to this human, Jessica Lanyadoo, and I think you're really going to like her stuff. And I was very skeptical.
I appreciate that. I really do. I like no sarcasm. I prefer skepticism.
I know you do.
Thank you very much.
And so you've been in my ear every week. I mean, truly, I'm just being completely upfront with my fandom because I just got to tell you.
Thank you. That's so awesome. I really appreciate it. That's so cool.
I feel I have such a strong parasocial relationship with you, so it's nice to get to.
I love it.
Me.
Thank you. That's really cool. I don't know how you feel about podcasting. I love it. It feels, it's weird. It's not really about podcasting. It's about having a platform where you can say what you really want to say. And yeah, after years and years of my career not really being about that, the podcast is a place where I can just really completely be how I want to be in the world. So it's been really lovely that way.
I'm so glad. And that actually really does bring me immediately to the first question that I have for you. Beautiful. Thank you for the layup.
You're welcome anytime.
Because one of the things that I really love and appreciate is the way that you use astrology and your psychic mediumship to help people, right? To help people make sense of themselves in the world. But also, you have a real bent towards social justice and activism. And I would just love to know, how did you find podcasting as that perfect place. It feels like a perfect place. Nothing's perfect, right? But as that place to explore those two and to reach that audience in that way.
Yeah. I am a person who has been in very progressive, very, very progressive queer community my whole adult life. And I moved to San Francisco in 1994. And my whole time in the Bay Area, in the San Francisco Bay Area, I've been around people who are very progressive, many of whom were much more progressive than me, some who were not, of course, and around activists and social workers and artists. And that's who I gravitate towards. That's what's important to me in my personal life. But I have been a counselor, right? So I am not a therapist. I am an astrologer and a psychic. I feel like it's very important for me to distinguish between these things, but I'm a counselor nonetheless. And so in a counseling situation, my politics are not relevant. My values are not relevant outside of my values in relationship to counseling and holding space for others. And so it never was connected. I am a writer, a reluctant writer. I dislike writing very much. I like having things written, but I really don't like writing. And so when I write, it is laborious and it takes so much energy for me. And then I overthink all the implications. So I'm not the one who's going to be like writing something on Medium or like an epic Instagram post or something. I'm not the one. I don't enjoy any of that kind of stuff personally. And when I was writing for publications, I can assure you with perfect confidence, they don't want to hear anything about my politics. They just want to hear about like, are you going to run into someone in an elevator and will there be chemistry? Like that's what they want. So it was never an option. And then when I got my podcast, I was able to just talk. And it just kind of blew my mind that I could do whatever I wanted. And the truth is, I've been an astrologer since the mid-90s and I am 47 years old. And I feel like my expertise with astrology is so, I got more than 10,000 hours. Like I have solid expertise. And because of that, I can inject more about the world because I understand how astrology works enough to be able to do that. And I think, because some people do ask me, and I don't know if this is exactly what you're asking, it's like, wow, it's cool that you can merge astrology and social justice or politics. Like, how do you do it? And some of how you do it is you get to be a really good astrologer and you happen to care about those things. And then it becomes an easy no-brainer. But I don't think I could have done this in the first 10 years of my practice. I don't. And if I had done it, I wouldn't have done it very well, I don't think. And, of course, some of that's because podcasting wasn't a thing then. But a lot of it is because I just wasn't able to. But for me, I can't look at astrology and not consider the social implications and the individual implications at the same time, because none of us exist in a vacuum. We all exist within these systemic conditions and this current, social climate. And when I say climate, I mean like climate change, like we all exist in all these things. And so for instance, mental health is not exclusive to those things. So all of that is it just feels inevitable, I guess is the best way to put it, as opposed to a plan. It's an inevitability. Yeah. I hope that answers that question.
It totally answers the question. And so getting back to my own experience, like this feels like such a selfish episode. It is a selfish episode.
I love that. I love it.
But so I'm just going to tell this quick story that I think relates to this, right? Which is that I have an arts background. I ran a theater and I also care deeply about social justice and politics and the environment, and I'm a human who is existing in a world and I need to care, right? Like we need to care. But also I've made a lot of missteps.
Yeah.
Right? I'm a Leo with a moon in Capricorn, with Capricorn all over the place. I'm a mess. So I can be a little performative and very self-righteous, right? And all of those things were things that I was really grappling with in 2019. And I have 2 teenage daughters who did not let me forget that I make missteps. And what I appreciated was that when I listened to your podcast, I also realized that, A, I had to hold myself accountable no matter what. And that no matter how I was going to engage, I needed to engage. And that might not look like what I thought it should look like. It meant that I needed to listen.
Yeah.
And to respond rather than react.
Yay.
That's what I got from you.
I'm so thrilled to hear that. That is exactly what I want you to have. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And then the other thing was, it's okay to make missteps. And this like gets me a little emotional, right? Like, it's okay.
Yes.
And that some people are going to be mad, and that's okay. And all you can do is just get up and keep going.
Yeah.
But not to use that as an excuse to disappear or to sit back and let other people take control. And I really want to thank you because truly it was your intros. It's particularly the intros.
Thank you.
That it was just a real a pep talk every week for me, and not in a cheerleader kind of way, but in a hey human, get your shit together.
I'm a triple Capricorn, and everything I say is like daddy being like, are you doing it? Are you doing it? Here's how you do it. I also will say, I mean, I'm thrilled to hear this. Obviously, this is exactly what I hope my work does. But I think, again, it's like a reflection. What you're talking about is a reflection of me not being an activist and not just being a mental health or a spiritual health person, but it's like this, it's the kind of coming together, because I think we're living in such a loud, noisy time, and it's very easy to compare yourself to people who've never made a mistake in public, or at least they've made lots of mistakes that you don't know about, or whatever it is. Like it's easy for us to get called out. I mean, I don't know about you, but every time I get called out or I see someone else getting called out, I shut down. Calling out I'm not a fan of it. I mean, I am a fan of it for politicians and corporations, but psychologically and spiritually, it's not effective. Shaming and blaming and pointing fingers doesn't lead to evolution and learning. I mean, it can, but not usually. And so I think part of what I'm the most passionate about, and I really hope I do effectively in the show, is support people in both being accountable and not being a jerk to yourself. Like being like, oh, I can make a mistake and I can learn from the mistake. It's not like I make a mistake and I have to do penance for the mistake. I just do better. And then we don't waste as much energy. And then we're also happier and more effective. And it's very hard to do. I mean, it's just very hard to do. And I think, so, and all to say, thank you very much.
And that's really a calling in culture, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Do you remember the name of the person who coined that concept of calling in?
No, I didn't even know that a person coined it. I mean, of course somebody did, but something's just come out of the collective. But no, I have no idea. Yeah,
I'm going to look it up and I'm going to put it in the show notes for this. So I want to be sure that I'm giving that person some credit.
Credit the source.
Yeah. I love that you have found your particular way of engaging and that you encourage people to find their way of engaging. Do you have, I know you do because you do it every week, but do you think you can share some thoughts on how we can use our understanding of self, and because you're an astrologer, our astrological charts and understanding of who we are astrologically and energetically to engage? Because we all engage in different ways. How can we use that understanding of self to find the ways to engage that are in better alignment with who we are and maybe not what we feel like we're expected to do?
Yeah, it's a good question. And the first part of my answer is to remember that human evolution, human development is cyclical, not linear. And so what works from the age of 25 to 28 is not going to work at 35 to 38 necessarily. What is the most effective use of your energies and your nature at 60 is different than at 30. And it's supposed to be. And again, when we hold ourselves to these linear standards of this is what I should do, or other people seem to be doing this and that seems like the right thing, why aren't I doing that? We kind of stop before we start. So that's like the starting point of my answer. I think that when we have self-awareness and we pair that self-awareness with self-acceptance, and that's the key, right? You have to pair it with self-acceptance. When you have self-awareness plus self-acceptance, determining the best next move isn't that hard. When you have self-awareness without self-acceptance, life is confusing and demanding and demoralizing because there's a million things you could do and you have no idea what those things are and you should be doing this and you shouldn't be doing that. And, for me, I started, marching and protesting in my teens back in Montreal, where I'm from. And I did it all throughout my 20s and 30s. And then when the pandemic hit, things shifted for me. And that happened to have coincided with me moving into my later 40s. So I don't know if it was the pandemic and all the things associated with it. I don't know if it's my age or if it's a lovely combo platter. I don't have to know. That's a self-acceptance bit. It's about identifying that doesn't feel like the way I can be impactful right now, even though my whole life so far, that has been an important way for me to feel impactful and to participate. And I actually really believe in, kind of boots on the ground style action. I think it's really effective. And I'm, a lot of things that I am not, I can focus on all the things I'm not. And I can assure you I do all the time. It's a total waste of energy. But when I catch myself doing it, then I try to refocus my energy on what I know I am and what I can do and what my strengths are. And then take a step from there. And so self-awareness is overrated because it's cerebral a lot of times. When it's not paired with self-acceptance, it doesn't do very much constructive. It's kind of like, I think you're supposed to take, I'm blanking on it right now. There's you take calcium, but you have to take it with magnesium in order for your body to really make use of it. It's the same thing with self-awareness and self-acceptance. I cannot tell you how many people, most people have self-awareness that they can't make use of. It's just torture. It's just self-flagellation. And so I think finding your best step right now is the best way to go. And what I have encountered over the last several years through the podcast and through these really tumultuous times is how many people want to be special in their activism and, want to feel like what they're doing is their calling, and how few people are just Googling or looking on social media or whatever and finding organizations and individuals who are doing the work already and falling in line behind that. It seems to be so few people who do that. And that's the best thing to do, in my view, if you have any ambiguity about what to do. And I think this is always a problem with humans, but I think especially right now with the world that we live in, people don't just volunteer or do a form of activism or whatever it is. They do it and then they post about it. They do it and then they make it part of their identity. And that's not bad or good. It is what it is. It's 2022. But I think there's great value, whether we're talking about service to others or we're talking about spiritual work. Honestly, they're both the same for me, of keeping some things private. There are things that I do that I will not talk about in public because it's not about me. I don't do them I do them for me in that I identify them as good things for me to do. And that feels good. And that is life affirming and gives my life meaning. But I don't do it for attention. And some things I do and I publicize it and I want people to see it and appreciate it and be a part of it. It's good to have a mix, and again, I think it's something that most of us struggle with. And, I'm sitting here thinking, well, yeah, but you're a Leo with 1 million planets in Capricorn. That's not necessarily going to be your vibe. It might be your nature to be and it's a party and we're all going to talk about it. And that's not bad. But again, I think it's about checking in with our motivations, because if we need validation in order to do spiritual work or activism, which honestly are not that different from each other from my perspective, then there's something where, again, we're not focused on self-reliance, self-reference, self-acceptance. It's too performative. And, for the fire signs out there, Leos, of course, top of the list, performance is fine. No downside. You know what I mean? It's just, we don't want it to be the only thing. It's about diversifying your internal portfolio. I just made that up on the spot. I'm sticking with it. I
think it also, one of the things that I'm finding, it's a constant discovery, right? And cyclical, as you mentioned. I'm 48, so
we're the same age. Oh, great.
So I also really appreciate the idea that what works at certain ages doesn't work at different ages, and that's okay. And that's on all levels too. That's also spiritually and physically and everything, and that there's no better or worse. Anyway, I digress.
And And if I could just interject, like, it is such a pleasure to hear you say your age, because usually I am out there talking about my age. And so many people, I mean, cis men don't seem to have a problem with talking about their age, but maybe more now than they did 10 years ago, right? There is a lot of weird stigma around age in a time where youth culture has such reverence for ancestors, and yet kind of can shit on older people or kind of discard. And it's really, I mean, it's not just these generations doing that. I think it's something that's happened a lot in many generations, but I think the more we talk about aging, the better it is, because, keeping it on topic of like activism and being engaged in the world, there has to be a season for everything. There has to be a season for everything. And when you first have a child, you're not going to be an activist in that moment. It doesn't make sense. You brought a child into the world. Like, we have times for different things, and life is theoretically long enough where we can do it all. It's about the pace we adopt. And again, we're back to self-acceptance, because we can all make an impact if we can accept that doesn't have to look a specific way always. And it's a real, like, I cannot remember the last time I spoke with somebody who was anywhere near my age who just said it out loud in public. So thank you.
Oh, I'm saying it everywhere. I think it's the only way through it, really.
Yeah.
When I started this podcast, I started the first season. This is season number 2. The first season was all about menopause and perimenopause. And the reason I started it was because so it was right after I turned 40. And I realized that I knew nothing about perimenopause and menopause. And I was in the thick of it, and I didn't know. And that just seemed really wrong and like a betrayal.
It's so wrong. Yeah. I can't tell you how much over the years, and 20 plus years, how many people I have counseled through perimenopause who have been to doctor after doctor after doctor with their symptoms, and not a single one, not just in the US, but mainly in the US, has said, oh, this sounds like perimenopause. Not a single one. And it's the first thing I can think of, because the symptoms are not subtle. So, I mean, I know it's off topic of what we're here to talk about, but perimenopause and menopause, but especially perimenopause, because it can last for so damn long and people know less about it, is a real passion of mine. It's so important. And it's this other puberty, right?
Yeah.
And it's destabilizing. And there are astrological transits that will often accompany it. And of course, perimenopause can happen at different ages. But it's really important. And, related to how we show up in the world, it changes us. It's meant to change us. And therefore, the ways in which we show up in the world are really important. But in perimenopause, there can often be a retracting, and through parts of menopause. And then post-menopause, there seems to be like a pushing forward, which, I haven't experienced it yet, but
me neither.
It's really fascinating, right? It's fascinating. And unfortunately, it's very stigmatized. So I'm glad to hear. I just love all that.
Oh, yeah.
stuff.
We're in it together. We're in it together.
Yes, we are.
And also there's a great resource, Heather Corinna. Do you know their work?
I don't know, but I'm bad at names. So my answer is always no to names.
I may send you this book then. They wrote a book called What Fresh Hell Is This? And it's really fantastic. And they also take a non-binary approach to menopause, which is really, really, really needed. Yes, we can go down that road.
We could change topics and just go there. But I think, if you have listeners who are younger, who are nowhere near perimenopause, or they don't know what that is, it's in some ways more important for them, because stepping into it and not knowing about it can be like torture. I mean, it's like I said, it's something I've been counseling people on for many years. So the moment I started to have symptoms, it took me only a couple months to be like, oh, I know what this is. And I went to the doctor and they're like, no, it's not. And so I went to different kinds of doctors until somebody helped me. And it took about a year to get the help I needed. And, it's vastly improved my life. So it's really important. Again, that self-awareness is very important. And then there has to be that self-acceptance of like, okay, so we already know that we're not going to get the help we need, likely. And so we have to push. And I think this is, it transcends into all the topics we're talking about.
It does. It does.
Yeah.
It does. And I've been thinking a lot about the word passion. It comes up all the time. I'm a coach, so it comes up all the time with my clients. And as a creative, it also comes up. I mean, it just comes up. It's it's a hot word right now.
Yeah.
And
also Leo, literal keyword for Leo. Yeah.
But the etymological roots of passion are related to suffering, right? The Greek word, which is like passio, is suffering. And it just, so when you say that you're passionate about something, it immediately makes me think of course, because we go through the suffering to then come through and be passionate. It's just, it's actually quite beautiful and is a reminder that when we experience pain and loss and suffering and sadness and emotional maelstroms that we have, that there are also, I'm not going to sugarcoat it, but there are also ways that we can turn it to serve too.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And speaking of maelstroms,
which, by the way, I don't think I frequently hear people use that word verbally. Love that word. I read it much more frequently than I hear it. So applause.
I could be mispronouncing it.
No, I don't think you are. But I also mispronounce words frequently, so I'm not a good resource.
Because we're readers, right? We're
exactly.
readers.
Exactly. Yeah.
But there's been a shit ton going on in the world, and my friend, you have called it. You have called it.
Yeah, it's unfortunate.
Well, maybe. I don't think it's unfortunate that you've called it, because I think that it has helped me to feel prepared, and I know that I'm not alone. And
that's good to hear.
And I want everyone to listen to your podcast and to go to your beautiful website.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm obsessed with it too. Thank you. Appreciate it.
To see all that you have to offer. But can you just, as we enter into this second half of 2022, can you just give us some quick cliff notes for what's ahead?
So, let me give you an intro to my answer, which is that when it comes to prediction, there are many astrologers whose primary objective is to have receipts. That makes sense. There's a lot of value to that. That is not important to me. I have never felt the need to justify myself to anyone. And the problem with prioritizing receipts is that it is prioritizing my acumen over the impact that those predictions hold. And so in 2017, when I saw COVID coming, I didn't know it would be called COVID, but when I saw an airborne virus coming and I saw times of unrest coming, I put a highlight on my Instagram for emergency supplies. I was like, hey, in case you need them. I started doing things in my personal life, but I really labored over whether or not saying this stuff in public was helpful. And the answer was no. And the answer was no, because what was anyone going to do about it? What was anyone going to do about it? Like, if I had any power in the world, it would be helpful. But otherwise, it's just meant that I was really, really stressed out for several years and powerless to do anything about it. And I wouldn't want to put that on anyone else, And so the value of prediction is, it's sticky and tricky. And I would say the most difficult part of my podcast, so the specific work of like forecasting, is prediction. Not because I don't do it. I do it a lot. My poor partner can attest to that. But because I don't want to pretend that I don't see certain things. And also, it's not constructive to name everything I see, because certain things are going to happen and there's nothing we can do about them. And how is some astrologer naming it and you freaking out about it for X amount of time going to really serve, right? So I'm constantly kind of trying to manage that line, and it's hard. That's my preamble to my answering your question.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. Thank you. It's difficult. So COVID, here or gone? Here, very much here, is that's one prediction. So masks, social distancing, washing of paws. I think vaccination is a really great tool. And I definitely think, that is a great direction, but at the very freaking least, masks, washing paws, social distance. I know I said it twice, but it felt worth repeating. So 2022, there's that. There's also a lot of indicators for war. And anyone who's studied history or been alive long enough knows that sometimes there are conflicts that erupt. like what is happening in Ukraine, like, Russia attacked and it was war and boom and go. And it's been this relentless thing. And a lot of times it's a little more subtle. It's a little more like we look back and we're like, oh, we were at war for a year before we started to call it a war, right? Especially in like world war scenarios. So all to say, we are at a time of great unrest. We have been in a time of great unrest, and I do not see that solving itself. So will we solve it? I don't know. Certainly, probably not any one of us single-handedly. This is a time where I have very conservative hopes, is the best way I can put it, or it's the most gentle way I can put it. What we're seeing with the unionization over at Amazon, that first union that kind of like, Amazon's already fighting it, but you know what I'm talking about, happened in Jersey, right? That union rights, workers' rights, civil rights are always advanced or at least fought for during Saturn and Aquarius transits, right? So that was in the 1930s, the 1960s, the 1990s, and here we are. And those are all times where major things shifted certainly in the US in regards to civil rights and in regards to union movements, labor movements. So I think that's a really positive thing that we can see. But sorry, I'm trying to keep it constructive. But I do think that the very unsexy, technical, and boring topic of the internet, digital safety, digital security, digital liberties, I shudder to think about what's happening in that part of the world and how slow we are to legislate consumer safety. And I say consumer, but we're not consumers, really. Technically we are, but all of life happens on our devices now, and there are no protections for us. So, the internet's having a Saturn return. And what comes next is, I'll call it concerning. Not a fan of facial recognition technology. Don't use your fucking thumbprint to open your devices. I know it's more convenient. Don't do that. Why would you give that to a company that clearly has no interest in your welfare? I speak to you, a person my age, and I feel like that's an easier sell than it is for people who've only ever lived with the internet, right? But those things are deeply concerning. I don't see Putin bowing down or stepping back. I'm watching, elections across the world. The 2022 election here at home, the astrology for it's not great. And I have concern about a low voter turnout. Which often happens.
Just had in Paris. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And, Le Pen, is that her name? Le Pen? She terrifies me more than most presidential candidates. She is absolutely terrifying. And if she wins, the world will suffer, not just France. The world will suffer. And it'll shift the power balance in Europe in a terrifying way at a time where Putin is doing his damn thing. And this is, of course, us talking about news, but the astrology is not great. It's just not great. So those are all things I'm concerned about. I could name more, but the real bummer is that I don't see a lot of really hopeful things at this time. And what I can say in terms of the constructive is that we can't fix anything. None of us as individuals can fix anything. But as a collective, we can shift things. Yes. And so finding the things that are important to us as individuals and that we have the skill set or the resonance with, so that we can kind of dedicate some amount of energy and effort towards is the way to go. And so, that's my kind of constructive take on it. Because again, there's not, what are you going to do? What are you going to do about a lot of this stuff? But I do have meaningful concerns. Every time I talk about COVID on my podcast, I get some people who are mad and just why are you talking about COVID? It's over. Stuff like that. Really, it concerns me. Yeah.
But you know what, Jessica? It should concern us.
Yeah.
And I know it's got to be hard to go onto people's podcasts and we're all like, it's great to see you. Oh, blah. And then immediately it's I got to tell you some really hard shit. But I also think that sobering as it is, sobering is not a bad thing, right? Sometimes it's time to sober up.
Yeah. Yes, you're right. You're absolutely right.
And I actually was trying to, glasses are coming off. I was trying to record a solo podcast before our interview. I couldn't do it. And it was because it was a sobering issue, which is not unrelated, which gets to entitlement. And because so many of these issues, so many of the reasons that we are having these issues and that we don't want to address them comes to our own sense of comfort and entitlement to that comfort.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I don't even know where to go with it, except that there are opportunities, and you point them out often. I'm trying to discover them myself. I'm in it, right? Of like, where am I choosing my own comfort out of a place of entitlement rather than out of a place of well-being? Because there's a big difference there.
Yeah. It's such an important question to ask yourself, for all of us to ask ourselves. Yes.
And I'm just in it. I'm in it, but I'm going to encourage listeners to just sit with that question a little bit. If what Jessica is saying is upsetting, sit with it and just see what comes up, and then talk to somebody.
Yeah.
Get the help that you need if it's bringing up big feelings. Yeah.
You know, to add to that and maybe make it worse, but there's a thing that I notice a lot of Americans, and in particular white Americans do, but Americans, which is this feeling of like, it couldn't possibly be that bad. It has to get better. Why isn't it getting better? Which is, you know, how many millions and millions and millions of people are currently living in conditions that are not better and have not gotten better, who have already been living in those conditions, right? Life is not fair. It is not symmetrical. If you do good things don't inherently happen for you. I think that through kind of like the election of Trump, so many people who are, you know, liberal or at least not conservative have been confronted with like, oh, wait, shit can go sideways here? That doesn't make any sense. It can't possibly. And for years, one of the most common questions I got was, when will this be over? When will things be back to normal? Now everyone's just pretending that it's over and it's back to normal. But the truth is, the human condition is not fair or easy, and no human is entitled to anything. Unfortunately, we should be. I'd like it if we were. If I was in charge, we would be. But yeah, we're not. Unfortunately, we're just not. And I think, again, that brings me back to acceptance. Like, it's unfair. Yes. And, you know, your 20s are for banging around and your teens are for banging around being like, that's fucked up. I just discovered this thing and it's not fair and everyone else needs to know and I need to do something with it. And then people start to get burnt out in their 30s and 40s. And that's when the complacency sets in. And that's exactly when we're meant to instead find sustainable action and sustainable ways of engaging, and understand that not every moment needs to be that. But certainly we must return to it. And you know, even if all guns, all nukes, all kicks and punches and steel-toed boots were released from this planet today, the climate's going to get us. Life's not fair. And so again, to me, I'm not trying to make it worse, and hopefully I'm not, but you know, it definitely stresses me out and tortures me in all these ways. And also I have accepted it. So therefore, when consequences of these things, any of the many myriad terrible things that exist happen, my first response isn't disbelief. It isn't spinning my wheels. It's okay. What do I need to do? Because I've already accepted it. And what happens for people when we don't accept, oh, look, you know, the sky is very slowly falling, is when it actually starts to land on us. We're like, oh my God, I thought I was making that up. And we spin our wheels and we lose energy, precious time and precious energy. And so to me, this is where acceptance of reality is really, really valuable. It's really valuable, even though it's quite difficult. And again, it's a process and it looks different at different times of our lives and for different people. Some people don't have the luxury of not accepting these things and others do, right? So it's a lot.
Yeah.
But it's true. People always ask an astrologer, like, give me a little taste of what's to come. And I always feel like, really? You want to ask me? You want to ask me? Am I the one? You know, brides.com. They contacted me 2 years in a row to predict what was to come. So the first time it was like at the end of 2019 or the start of 2020. And I was like, are you sure you want to have this conversation with me? It was before COVID had like landed in the US. And they were like, yeah. And I was like, are you sure? And I was like, okay, all of 2020 is a bad time to get married. Just don't do it. Like, it's not going to work. And they were like, ha, 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 ha. And then, of course, COVID, and it blew up that whole world. And so they came back the next year. And I was like, still no. And then did not come back this year. And I do not blame them because they don't want to hear it. I don't blame them. But yeah, it's a tricky thing, asking questions that you want a specific answer for. Yeah.
Yeah.
Real talks. Yeah. Yeah. For better or worse.
Acceptance, and it comes back to what you were saying before with self-awareness, self-consciousness, and self-acceptance, right? Yeah. Acceptance is a powerful, powerful place. And it's also a place where we can find peace.
Yeah.
Because we need it. We need a place to land. We can't be on fire all the time. It's not sustainable, just as you were saying. And so ways to not bury our head in the sand, but to find acceptance, that's really as far as I'm concerned, it's the only real way through.
I agree.
This. All right.
Yep. Yeah. It's a lot. It is a lot. And I think, I have a lot of empathy for young people staring down the barrel of all of this. I mean, all of us, old people and young people, I think, are the most vulnerable right now. So yeah, it's a lot. If you're listening to this and all of this feels like so overwhelming, find old people who don't have family and volunteer with them. It doesn't have to be policy changing to be impactful. There's so many ways we can show up. And I think doing good feels good, and it bolsters you for doing more. Doing nothing, sitting in anxiety feels bad, and it strips you of the energy you need to do more. So we can't always, sit around. I sit around feeling anxious as a part-time job. Like, I don't want to act like I don't. But, at a certain point, I'm like, okay, and now I need to rally, and I need to figure out what's the next move. Not the best move necessarily, but the next best move. Yeah, it's about a step. Everybody's going to think I'm a liar now because for the past season, I've been saying I'm an optimist. I am. That's the thing. I am an optimist, but it's grounded in realism, right? Right. This is real, and there's just no way around it. Yeah. Can we switch gears for a minute? Because I want to be mindful of your time. Absolutely. Yes, let's do it. When I'm working with my clients and we're really trying to affect change in our lives, and that can be personal change, it can be small shifts in relationship dynamics that can have a huge impact, right? Yeah. Or it can be something huge, like launching a huge campaign or starting a new business or something bigger than that. But there are really what I see as 7 paths to really exploring that change. And I'd love to just do sort of a rapid fire because I see you as such a powerful creative change maker. I would love to just take you through those 7, and you can just do a rapid fire response to how those show up in your life. And it can be messy, and they can overlap. They do overlap. Okay. I'm into it. Let's play. Okay, let's play. Okay, so the first path is emotional. It's like how I use it to change. Clarify it for me a little bit. Yeah, sure. It can be either how you use it to change or how it shows up for you in a time of change. Because sometimes we don't know that we're consciously using it, right? I see what you mean. For me, emotional maturity is one of the most important things, in life in general, for myself and with others, because it is about having the willingness and ability to be in emotion and to, as you kind of named earlier, respond after you've given yourself space to react instead of simply reacting, or not allowing yourself to feel and then responding. So you don't really give yourself a full experience of your emotions, and then that shit leaks out later. It is very difficult to be emotionally mature, but in order to sustain any creative venture, any corporate venture, anything, and come out healthy and right with yourself, emotional maturity, that's the damn move. And it looks different for different people. Emotional maturity for a moon in Capricorn is different than emotional maturity for a moon in Gemini. and it should be. Emotional maturity for a 30-year-old is different than for a 70-year-old, and it should be. So, to me, again, it's not linear. It's cyclical, but that's my answer.
I love that answer.
Okay. I'm playing the game. The
next one is analytical.
Okay.
Triple Capricorn.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm very analytic, and I'm a big fan of analysis, and also analysis without pragmatism, without emotional integration is blah, 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 blah. And it's cruel, which is how we see, for instance, AI being so freaking racist, being so freaking problematic, how we see so much of innovation not being humane, right? So analysis is really essential. It's so essential. But when it's not tempered with emotion and all these other things, including embodiment, it just becomes kind of jerking off, and jerking off is great, but it's not the same as like thinking and communicating and listening. So
it's not a full relationship.
No, it's not a full relationship. And I mean, it can be a full relationship I don't want to get lost in the jerking off, but you understand no shade on jerking off, but this is a metaphor, and hopefully it makes sense in the metaphor. Yeah.
It does.
Thank you.
It does.
Thank you.
Intuitive.
Intuition, when not rooted in the system, can be fantasy. I think fantasy is really important for lots and lots of people. Not me personally, but it is for, I think, maybe probably most people. And it's very different than intuition. And so being able to resource our intuition, which every human has, I think requires a relationship to the body. And it also requires that we don't look outside of ourselves for answers disproportionately. And again, what that proportion is individual. But yeah, to me, intuition, of course, is quite very important. And yeah.
I see a lot of people who think that their emotional responses are intuitive responses.
Yes.
Or that their creative responses are intuitive responses.
Yes.
And they're very different, which I think gets to the fantasy idea that you were just
and it's about not being in the body about it. Because when you really sit in your body with those kinds of impulses, what happens is this starts to feel sad or bad. And that's how you know it's not your intuition, something else. When you start to kind of like tie that balloon to, whatever, to a thing, you root it to the ground on some level, you really get to know what it's made of. You get to know what it is. And a lot of times people don't want to know. They just want to be like, it was my intuition that this bird meant this thing when it landed, near me. And it could. And it can also be you extrapolating and creating something and having a fantasy. And that's not bad. But when we mislabel things, we get into trouble. And this is where, kind of to your point, a lot of it is cerebral. It's analytic. It's not intuitive. And so it doesn't work. And you're like, I can't believe my intuition failed me. And a lot of times it's because it wasn't intuition. Sometimes it's because intuition fails us. And sometimes it's because we misinterpret it. Yeah.
So you brought us to the next one, which is physical.
I find meat suits to be kind of an embarrassing thing. I mean, it's like I would be happy to be free of these meat suits. But we are here in these bodies on this planet because that's the damn assignment. That's the damn assignment. There are so many ways to have a body. There are so many kinds of bodies we can have. Our bodies change over the course of time, but they are the ship to which we are the captain of. And that's it, So it is our job to take care of that ship. It is our job to steward it well and to understand that our bodies are, okay. So from my perspective, there's our soul, which is this really big thing, and our bodies exist inside of our soul. And so many people think of their soul as something inside of their bodies, but that's not my perspective at all. The body is inside of the soul. So the body is an extension of the soul, but it is not the soul. And so understanding that it's part of our spiritual work to materially care for, invest in, and tend to the body, enjoy the body, play with the body, but also those other more boring or difficult things. That's key to the human existence.
I love that. Speaking of soul and beyond the soul and extending beyond the body, spiritual.
Interesting. Spiritual separate from intuition. Because of course, for me, they're not very separate, but I see how for other people, of course, they would be. Okay. Spirituality means really different things for different people. And again, at different times of life. But spirituality is a really interesting one that I'm having a hard time naming, because it's like, I'm such a spiritual person that literally everything I do is, I don't see a separation between spiritual and everything else, which is, again, part of why, when we first started talking, the conversation about like, oh, you marry astrology and activism. It's like, well, how can you be a spiritual person and not care about the world and try your best with others? To me, it's the same thing. It's not separate at all. And I think spirituality means a lot of different things for different people, but ultimately it's when you're falling asleep and there's that self that you're talking to with yourself, that like inner dialogue, that connection. Yeah, that's spiritual. That's spiritual. It's not for anyone else. It's not with anyone else. To me, that's really spiritual. And so spirituality is not a meditation or a yoga pose, and it's not a church or, a temple. Those things are articulations of spirituality. They're potentially containers or vehicles for spirituality. But spirituality is inevitable because we're spiritual beings and we have souls. So I don't know how great that answer was, but that's what you got.
I think it's a great answer. And my big takeaway from that, well, I don't know if it's from that, but from listening to you, is that what I feel from you is that spirituality is in no way related to dogma.
Yes. Yeah. 100%. That's cerebral. If we're going back to your 7 items, that's the mind. The dogma is ego and mind. Yeah. Or disassociation and mind.
Yeah. Yeah. The creative path.
These two are really hard for me. It's interesting. So creativity is incredibly, you're asking a triple Capricorn. So I don't think of myself as a creative person. I don't think of creativity. I don't think about creativity at all, to be honest with you, which is my personality and not a reflection of who I am actually at all. So I feel like I don't know what to say about creativity. I mean, I think that having a life without any creativity, it can feel incredibly stunted and like there's no flow. Creativity, the experience and expression of it is like experiencing flow. And that might be like a power hose. And it might be like a gentle rock or like a sweet breeze. There's a lot of ways that we can experience that kind of flow. But creativity is, I think, a really essential part of being a happy or a fertile human. And I also understand that there are many people who experience and express creativity in kind of like atypical ways based on convention. And I think that convention needs to change and has been needing to change around that. So, I do see, I'm in the Bay Area. And so I'm in the world of tech. And I used to just think, oh my God, technology is so boring. And it is. Like literally, I hate nothing more than staring at code. I do not enjoy it at all. And that said, my partner is a software engineer and I watch how he codes, and he's also a poet, and he studied poetry for many years. And for him, it's poetry. It's just a different way of writing, and that really kind of opened me up. I mean, I would like to tell you quickly, but years it took for me to believe him. But yeah, I definitely see how it is creativity, because anything that we approach creatively is creativity. It is creative. So I know it's a kind of roundabout answer, but it's a question I'm struggling with right now, to be honest, personally, in my personal life. So it's, yeah.
Well, I think that reframing, it's always interesting to me. There are always a few words, at least one word, often up to 4 words that people are like, oh, I don't like that word. And creativity, it can be one of them. And I get that. There are times, I am a creative. Like I identify as a creative and I'm like, ew, creativity. So, and that's okay. Like sitting with that is part of it, right? That's part of the fun.
Yeah.
It's part of the challenge. But reframing it as flow, I think is really beautiful. And you're right. I do think, I wouldn't say happiness, but I would say that a lot of joy comes from that place of flow.
Yeah.
Again, that's getting into semantics. Semantics.
But they're so important. Obviously, you're a word nerd just like me. And there is a meaningful difference between happiness and joy. And you're right, it is a joy thing and not a happiness thing. Happiness is a lot more fleeting. Joy, I think, can spark less happiness, but it has like more insidious roots, And so I if I was given the choice, like if, somebody came in and was like, you can have happiness or joy, I would definitely take joy any day of the damn week. Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah.
And the last one is social.
We are a social animal. I think that we have strongly social needs. And as an kind of introverted person who hasn't missed socializing during a 2+ year pandemic, I will say that I think that finding our place in the context of this planet and humanity is really what the social part of our needs are. And when we live for others or we are locked into convention, it becomes very difficult to do that. And you can do all the right things, but if your foundation is like pointed in opposite direction of what your social needs and what your spiritual and your creative needs actually are, you're going to have a real rough time of it, And again, you and I are at the age where it becomes a lot more visceral after 40. What that really means. So, we may cognitively understand that before 40, but it becomes experiential after 40. And so to me, the social component to the human condition is deeply interesting. It's something I'm passionate about. And also, I think it requires more reflection than we tend to give it. We tend to focus on and reflect on our relationships instead of on our social needs in nature. So again, I'm back to the self-awareness coupled with self-acceptance. Yeah. How many years did I force myself to go out and be social because that's what people did? And eventually I was like, oh, these are the ways that I am. And so therefore I can be different. And if I can just share an anecdote, in my early 20s, I would hang out with groups of friends as one does, walk in the streets as one does. And I would be miserable because I like walking fast. I hate walking slow. Walking in a group with a bunch of nerds that you really like is so annoying because they're slow. Groups are slow. And so at a certain point, I was like, okay, it's already hard enough for me to socialize. I'm just going to be that person who walks ahead of the group. And this was before cell phones, so it was no texting your friend. And at first, it kind of people got a little butthurt and they were like, what's happening? And then people were like, oh, that's just Jessica. She walks ahead. And they accepted it because it wasn't personal. I proved it over time. I didn't buckle when people were a little annoyed or why are you leaving? And yeah, I would walk ahead. And then I just became, that's who Jessica is. She walks ahead. And it really radically changed my ability to hang out with people in groups. And it sounds like such a small thing, but it always stands out for me because it was like a Herculean feat for me to give myself permission to just try to be what I was and to find ways of accepting myself so that I could be around people in a way that worked. Because I was so agitated if we got someplace and I was like, I've just been crawling through the city streets and I want to cut someone. I got there. I was happy. I sat around waiting. It allowed me to energetically collect myself. And then I did whatever socializing with whatever amount of awkwardness that is inherent to my nature and moved on with life. So yeah, again, these things evolve, but understanding who and what we are and how we can participate socially is really important. So yeah, that's my social answer. Was that the last one? Is that all 7?
That's all 7.
Good job. You did good. Good questions.
You did a great job.
Thank you.
The walking fast, I just had the great luxury of going. I used to live in Amsterdam and with my family, and we just were able to go back quickly between surges. Yeah. And it was a real privilege. But we have 3 Leos and an Aquarius. The 3 Leos are all women. And then my poor Aquarius husband. And it was like a race because none of us can stand that group, the slow group walk. Yes. It was.
So you know what I'm talking about, right? I mean, it's a weird thing because when groups of people walk, it's like it becomes a meander. I can't meander. I just can't meander. And yeah, it's nice that your whole family is we're racing. This is a race, not a walk. That's great.
My 20-year-old got shin splints, just want to say.
Oh, that's amazing. I mean, I feel bad for her, but also that's amazing.
It's also pretty funny.
Yeah, it's pretty good. That's good. It's very good. Yes.
Hey, Jessica, thank you. So I want to thank you for engaging socially in a way that makes sense for you by having this podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate that. You too. Right back at you.
And for also being a guest on mine. It's really an honor to get to share time with you. And
it's been such a joy. I feel like I could talk to you for hours. So we should do this again.
Here are my key takeaways from this conversation with Jessica Lanyadoo. Number 1, shaming, blaming, and pointing fingers doesn't usually lead to evolution. We need to hold people accountable, but we also need to not be a jerk to ourselves or to others. And by the way, it is Loretta Ross who has championed a calling in culture, and I provided a link to her TED Talk in the show notes. Number 2, human evolution, like human development, is cyclical, not linear. So what works in your 20s may not work in your 50s, and we can find different ways to engage in the world that reflect our personal evolution. Number 3, when you pair self-awareness with self-acceptance, determining the next best move isn't so hard. To glean more of Jessica's wisdom, visit her website, lovelanyadoo.com, and subscribe to Ghost of a Podcast. Special thanks to our sponsors at Code-Based Co-working and to WTJU and the Virginia Audio Collective for your support. Thank you so much for listening to the Pause to Go podcast. If you got something out of this episode, let us know. Share it with a friend, join our Facebook group, and subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts if you loved it. If not, no worries. We want you to tell it like it is, and we'd love to have your input. If you want to know more about what I'm up to, you can follow me on Instagram at The Lovely Unbecoming or at my website, thelovelyunbecoming.com. Stay curious, y'all.